We will hear today about some innovative tools, new ways to collaborate, new ways to use investment capital, for example, to make a real difference. You're going to hear from three dynamic leaders today, Liz Thompson, Bruce McNamer, and Lucy Baird, about how they're leveraging these tools and practices in their own work.
Just to get started then, in that vein, I just want to open with a general question. How did philanthropy, or the idea of giving back, first become a priority for you in your life? And where did that impulse come from, and how did it take shape? And we might as well start with Liz, because you're sitting right next to me.
Okay. So I was born and raised here in Chicago in Cabrini Green neighborhood, a name that doesn't mean a lot to young people now because they don't know the history of the neighborhood, but I'm sure so many of you do. A neighborhood that was definitely under-resourced, but full of love and full of community. It was easy for us to figure out once we determined that we wanted to really give back in a way that involved our resources. Education was clearly going to be the lever that we would pull in order to do that. So that's the what we would invest in. What structure we would use was less clear to us at the beginning, right? We didn't, again, philanthropy, don't even know how to spell it at this point. So we started off with a donor advised fund, and I recommend that as a way to dip your toe in. But then we were encouraged by a number of people that Black people needed to see more Black people doing philanthropy. And doing it through a donor advised fund is not the most visible way to do philanthropy.
Right.
And so we decided to go full throttle and start a family foundation. Again, philanthropy in our community is ubiquitous, but doing it through this other mechanism called philanthropy was not something that we saw a lot of other Black people doing growing up, and so we wanted to do it in this public way.
So Bruce, let's talk about this journey as it pertains to Builders Initiative, and how, if you could walk us through a little bit, as you understand it, of the history of that organization, and how Lucas and the people around him, first of all, decided that this organization needed to happen, and how it took shape.
So the what of what we do in the world will not be that surprising. It is sustainable food and agriculture, it's healthy oceans, it's climate, and it's climate equity. And it's our hometown, Chicago. All of that with an overlay of equity from the get-go. The how is a little bit different. We have grant making, which you will all be familiar with, but we have an endowment, and we've invested. That's now 90% invested for good. In contrast to the traditional kind of church and state, you invest over here and you give away here. Our endowment is invested for good. We have pools of, I'd call it philanthropic venture capital. So we take big bets on high risk but high impact companies and funds that are working in the ocean space or sustainable food and ag and environmental justice. So different pools of capital, different tools to kind of get at the same thing.
You were stepping into just a well-burnished tradition at Baird, established by your predecessors, and I'm just wondering, as you sort of inherited that mantle, how you set priorities for yourself in this role, and you know, were there areas that you felt needed a refresh, needed a change?
So when I joined, Goodwill Works, which is our charitable arm, was already established in collaboration with the trust. My predecessor, Jennifer Alta Warden, who I think is here, really built the sort of basis of it. And the idea that we really had was to leverage sort of how many transactions we do, and to think about doing charitable giving through every transaction. And so it started off as our agents giving a small amount from their commission, and then we matched it, and that became the funding. When I joined, we thought about rebooting it, and I really think my role is mostly listening. The charitable arm is not about our family, it's about everyone in our company, because everyone contributes to it and everyone helps decide where the money goes. And then we have a company-wide strategy that's focused on empowering homeownership and strengthening communities. And so everyone donates into Goodwill Works, and then everyone gets to decide in various capacities where this money goes.
Let me ask, what are some of the biggest lessons that you've learned in your entire arc of your philanthropic journey, and what changes, if any, have you made along the way when it comes to your tools and strategies?
I think the most important learning for us is that it takes a team. It's about listening to everyone in your organization. And I think some of the most inspiring stories that I hear about our charitable arm are from agents in our offices who sort of use the tools that we've given them to create these huge fundraisers and are doing these things called field days where all these offices get together to raise big amounts of capital, leveraging our matching program. So I think that has been really inspiring for us over the last few years, is just to see sort of providing these resources to our people and then just watching them sort of run with it and really take advantage of it and get so much pride and sort of empowerment and joy out of those resources, which, you know, are not, we get to provide that because we're a privately owned company and we can make decisions to really prioritize giving back as a part of our culture, which I think is pretty unique.
I've learned this over time, and it's actually reflected in one of our values at Builder's Vision. That is, you know, beginner's mind. Like, keep learning, keep being open to learning, because that's the only way you're going to be effective in the world, is learning from and working with others. And you can have all the expertise in the world, and if you're not listening to and learning from people with lived experience in the space you're working in, you're missing the point and you're not going to be successful.
An old African proverb, if you want to go fast, go alone, but if you want to go far, go together. And so doing work with people, Chicago, as you mentioned, Anne, our city is like no other when it comes to our philanthropic environment and how civic leaders work with nonprofit leaders, work with corporate leaders. There is no other city like it in our nation, and you can find colleagues that are anxious to do the work that you want to do. When you decide what your philanthropy is going to be about, make sure the people that you're working with understand it, deeply understand it.
So finally, what advice would the three of you give our friends here this morning about how they might think differently about their own giving and some of the tools they can use to become more full-fledged participants in the philanthropic endeavor that is Chicago?
Find ways to collaborate, and those can be in more formalized kind of funding collaboratives, giving circles. I mean, just comparing notes with people on what you do. It's a good way to get into philanthropy. It's a good way to learn from each other, and over time that scales. We are involved in substantial funding collaboratives now with millions of dollars, but you know, I've been around community foundations and like, you know, giving circles where everybody's, you know, this year we're each going to put in $5,000 and decide how to spend it collectively. The second thing I'd just say is, again, preaching to the choir, like beyond philanthropy, the thing about bringing our whole selves to the difference we want to make in the world. There's so many dimensions to our lives.
Yeah.
How can you bring all of ourselves to how we invest our money?
And I think also just realizing that you know, you can look outside the sort of traditional models. I mean, we looked at B Corp structures, at corporate capitalism, things like that when we were sort of rebooting our charitable arm to think about what does partnership look like? How can we leverage our resources or our space? We donate space to some of our nonprofit partners. And thinking sort of outside of just monetary donations, what resources or, you know, even our platform of being a big company in Chicago, how does us giving back to certain organizations, that has a sort of trickle-down benefit. So thinking about it kind of in big picture.
One other thing I want to say is I'm an advocate for finding people that are already doing the work and support them, but sometimes, like I just said, no one is doing that work. And so sometimes it means you got to swallow hard and you just got to do the doggone thing yourself. But give yourself permission to evolve, because we didn't start there. When we started our family foundation in 2014, I promise you I wasn't thinking about $1 million each to 5 leaders every year. But that's where we are now. So be a student of the game, let yourself evolve, let yourself make mistakes, and hitch your wagon to people that know what they're doing and that share your values.